Abandon.
How could she abandon her own child?
We had to abandon the car and walk the rest of the way.
Fearing further attacks, most of the population had abandoned the city.
The game had to be abandoned due to bad weather.
They abandoned their attempt to recapture the castle.
They were accused of abandoning their socialist principles.
She abandoned herself to grief.
Adverse.
They fear it could have an adverse effect on global financial markets. Miller's campaign has received a good deal of adverse publicity. The expedition was abandoned because of adverse weather conditions, developments which had adversely affected their business. His courage in the face of adversity.
Aggregate.
The smaller minorities got an aggregate of 1,327 votes. In the aggregate, women outlive men by 7 or more years.
Manchester United won 2-1 on aggregate.
An increase in the aggregate production.
Cultivation.
Soil cultivation.
These fields have been under cultivation for years. Terraces for rice cultivation covered the hillsides. Fertilize.
After the egg has been fertilized, it will hatch in about 6 weeks.
Intensify. In June, the Civil War intensified.
His mother's death intensified his loneliness.
An intensification of fighting in the region.
Irrigate. The water in Lake Powell is used to irrigate the area.
Major irrigation projects.
Obtain.
Further information can be obtained from head office. You will need to obtain permission from the principal.
The results obtained through these surveys. Photosynthesis.
Precipitation.
Anticipate.
Sales are better than anticipated.
The schedule isn't final, but we don't anticipate many changes.
We don't anticipate any problems.
A good speaker is able to anticipate an audience's needs and concerns. It is anticipated that the research will have many different practical applications.
Daniel was eagerly anticipating her arrival. Copernicus anticipated in part the discoveries of the 17th and 18th centuries.
The anticipatory atmosphere of a big college football game.
Catastrophe.
The Black Sea is facing ecological catastrophe as a result of pollution.
Sudan requires food immediately to avert a humanitarian catastrophe.
If the contract is cancelled, it'll be a catastrophe for everyone concerned.
A catastrophic fall in the price of rice.
The failure of the talks could have catastrophic consequences.
Collide.
A car and a van collided on the motorway.
I ran around the corner and almost collided with Mrs. Lawrence. The President has again collided with Congress over his budget plans.
Erupt. Violence erupted after police shot a student during the demonstration.
A political row erupted over the MP's comments.
They were angry to the point of erupting into riot.
He erupted into loud, desperate sobs.
A volcanic eruption.
The eruption of violence. Famine. The Great Potato Famine in Ireland. Widespread famine had triggered a number of violent protests.
1 million people are facing famine.
Flood.
Towns and cities all over the country have been flooded.
There are now fears that the river could flood.
Refugees are still flooding across the border.
Donations have been flooding in since we launched the appeal.
A plan to flood the country with forged banknotes. We've been flooded with offers of help.
Car manufacturers have been accused of flooding the market with cheap cars.
Impact.
We need to assess the impact on climate change.
Persevere.
It can be tricky at first, but persevere. He persevered with his task until he had succeeded in collecting an armful of firewood.
She had persevered in her claim for compensation.
Plunge.
Her car swerved and plunged off the cliff. Both the climbers had plunged to their deaths.
Oil prices have plunged to a new low. In the recession, the company's profits plunged 60%.
It's a difficult situation. You can't just plunge in and put everything right. I don't agree, she said, plunging into the conversation.
He stripped off and plunged into the sea.
He opened the bag and plunged his hand in.
Unleash.
Adapt.
Adapt.
The children are finding it hard to adapt to the new school. Flowers, which are well adapted to harsh winters. The ability to adapt is a definite asset in this job. How do these insects adapt themselves to new environments? The car has been adapted to take unleaded gas. Many children buy books after they have been adapted for television. She lives in a specially adapted flat.
Diverse.
Subjects as diverse as pop music and archaeology.
Diversify. Farmers forced to diversify away from their core business.
The company is planning to diversify into other mining activities.
Evolve.
Fish evolved from prehistoric sea creatures.
The school has evolved its own style of teaching.
The idea evolved out of work done by British scientists. The group gradually evolved into a political party.
Feature.
Airbags are a standard feature in most new cars.
An important feature of Van Gogh's paintings is their bright colours.
A feature on holidaying with your dog.
He had fine, delicate features. Her eyes were her best feature.
Hedges are an important feature of the landscape in Britain.
There were a couple of short cartoons before the main feature. Generation.
Like most of my generation, I had never known a war.
The younger generation don't know what hard work is.
First-generation immigrants.
A third-generation American.
Inherent.
I'm afraid the problems you mention are inherent in the system. Every business has its own inherent risks.
Firefighting is an inherently dangerous occupation.
Migration.
Physical.
Don't be put off by his physical appearance.
He was obsessed with physical fitness.
My attraction to him was totally physical.
Their physical relationship had never been very good. She's a very physical person. Football can be a very physical game.
The physical world around us.
The physical environment.
A physical explanation for this phenomenon.
Process.
Repetition can help the learning process.
The company is in the process of moving to new offices. Coal forms by a slow process of chemical change.
I solved the problem by a process of elimination.
Survive.
Only 12 of the 140 passengers survived.
She survived the attack.
I don't know how you all managed to survive on Jeremy's salary.
The amount that a family needs each week just to survive.
A few pages of the original manuscript still survive.
The main building was demolished, but the library still survives as a museum.
Constraints on spending have forced the company to rethink its plans.
The constraints of family life. There have been financial and political constraints on development.
Constraints imposed on teachers by large class sizes.
Freedom from constraint.
Financial factors should not constrain doctors from prescribing the best treatment for patients.
Poor soil has constrained the level of crop production.
Women's employment opportunities are often severely constrained by family commitments.
Contaminate.
Drinking water supplies are believed to have been contaminated.
He claims the poster ads have contaminated Berlin's streets.
Radioactive contamination.
Deplete.
Salmon populations have been severely depleted.
The depletion of the ozone layer. Dispose.
An incinerator built to dispose of toxic waste. I am still not sure how best to dispose of the shares.
Your idea at least disposes of the immediate problem.
2 goals by Raúl disposed of Barcelona.
The body releases a chemical that disposes you towards sleep.
Elemental.
Love and fear are two of the most elemental human emotions.
Elemental sulfur.
Emission.
Britain agreed to cut emissions of nitrogen oxide from power stations.
Extinction. Species in danger of extinction. The breed was on the verge of extinction.
They were hunted almost to extinction.
Conservationists are trying to save the whale from extinction.
Many endangered species now face extinction.
Their traditional way of life seems doomed to extinction.
Conservationists are trying to save the whale from extinction.
Reservoir.
She found she had reservoirs of unexpected strength.
Shrink.
I'm worried about washing that shirt in case it shrinks.
The city continued to shrink.
Treatment can shrink a tumour.
She listened, shrinking under the blankets, to their shouts.
The leadership too often shrinks from hard decisions.
Stable.